Hey everybody, welcome to EduMatch Tweet and Talk. This is our 41st episode, and we're going to be talking about preventing classroom disturbances. So follow along with us on Google Plus as well as on Twitter with the hashtag EduMatch. So looking forward to seeing the back channel there. Also, you can sign up to be the EduMatch featured person of the day, where we give you huge props on Twitter all day long just by going to our website at edumatch.education. And from there, there'll be a Google form that you can fill out, and we'll get all the information about you that we can tweet out and help to make these connections. So definitely cannot wait to see you all there. So tonight we are going to be talking about we're going to be talking about how to minimize disturbances in the classroom. So our moderator, Valerie, is having a couple of technical difficulties, but she's going to join us in progress. So definitely cannot wait for that. But I just wanted to introduce our wonderful panelists. So we have Tierraney and we also have Dan. So I guess if each of you can just please introduce yourselves. So I guess we'll start first with Tierraney.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Tyranny Richardson. I am a blogger and YouTuber and a fourth grade math teacher in a Title I school in Houston, Texas. I also coach teachers on classroom management, both on my campus and virtually. So, for example, on Monday, April 11th, I am hosting a online free teacher masterclass called 3 Steps to Stress-Free Classroom Management. So that's just one example of how I coach teachers virtually and help them with their classroom management progress, and helping them just to use effective classroom management strategies to help them be even more effective teachers for their students. So you can sign up there at misstierraney.com, and you can also check out more teacher resources that I share there.
All right, awesome, and welcome. This is your first time on an EduMatch Tweet and Talk, so we are very happy to have you here. Okay, and Dan, this is also your first time on an EduMatch Tweet and Talk, so welcome. If you could please introduce yourself to everyone who's watching.
Absolutely. Hey, everybody. My name is Dan Kreiness. I am an instructional coach at a middle school level, probably soon to be middle school and high school, in Derby, Connecticut. I just came out of the classroom earlier this school year. And while I think I have lots of different hats that I wear in terms of what I coach teachers on, definitely classroom management and minimizing distractions is a big part of that. So I think this will be right up my alley.
All right, fantastic. And we have our awesome moderator, Valerie, who is here with us. So Valerie, if you could please introduce yourself, and I'm also going to hand it over to you at this time.
Awesome. Can you guys hear me pretty well? Awesome. Great. So I am Valerie Lewis, a disruptive Georgia educator, work with 10th and 11th grade language arts special needs students, and I am so excited to talk on this topic of classroom management. So when we think about classroom management, we're thinking, or at least I know I do, control, so that learning can happen. So in this conversation today, we're going to take a look at how we may manage our classrooms and what that means to you, and why is that necessary. I think a lot of times as pre-service teachers take classes and courses, classroom management is one of those prerequisite courses that they need to take before going into the classroom. So my first question to the panelists, and since we don't have a full house today, that really allows us an opportunity to get into some good conversation. When you think of classroom management, how do you define that, or what comes to mind when you think of classroom management? And you could choose to define that or how you use it in your classroom. Open range. So we'll start with Tyranny.
All right, so classroom management to me, if I'm thinking in my classroom, is just something that I use to help me have a organized and controlled learning environment that's safe for all of my students and provides them the opportunity to receive the, academic academics that I am giving to them. So, for example, if I'm trying to teach them area and perimeter, if I don't have strong classroom management, then there's no way that they're going to be able to effectively learn. So that's just what classroom management would be for me, and why it's important in my classroom.
Excellent. Dan, how about you? How would you do that?
I definitely agree. I think that the biggest part about classroom management is everything that goes into making the atmosphere and the environment in the classroom conducive to a very productive and very effective teaching and learning process. I think routines and policies and all that stuff play a big part in it, but definitely student engagement is huge. So just anything that keeps that atmosphere conducive to the teaching and learning process, and avoiding the distractions, which is exactly what we're talking about.
Exactly, and I think the two of you hit it right on the head in terms of talking about even classroom environment. So I think a lot of times when people think about the classroom and management, they're always thinking about what comes from the teacher point of view. But ultimately, the end product is to be able to engage the students. But simple things like classroom furniture, how it's set up, those things actually do impact you being able to manage your classroom as well. So I think on a holistic point of view, we need to look at all factors, as Dan mentioned, that can be a distraction to students. And so what I want to do is go ahead and move us into our first question here. So when is it okay, if ever, to use sarcasm or yelling in the classroom? And any one of you can pipe in on that.
So I think that, well, this is a great question, first of all. I've always ever worked at a middle school level. And I think it's a really important. Step one is to really know your students well, because I think that there is an okay time and a place for the sarcasm, and I think it's okay to raise your voice from time to time, as long as you're not really singling anyone out. I think if you use it as a tool to maybe get the whole class back on page, I think the term yelling and raising your voice sometimes may be a little bit different, at least in my opinion. I think sarcasm is okay, but it's only okay if you're using it with students who aren't gonna, I guess, they don't know how to handle it. I've had classes where they've been great at handling it, and we can joke back and forth, and I can dish it out, and they can take it, and vice versa. And I've had classes who, even if I start the smallest little bit, they get too carried away, and then the environment just breaks down completely.
Absolutely. Tierraney, how about you?
Yeah, to add on to what he's saying, personally, I'm not a big fan of sarcasm because it can be taken easily the wrong way and misunderstood, just as a normal person myself, not just being a teacher, but in general, that's how I feel about sarcasm. However, in my own personal life, I'm not offended by sarcasm when I know that person well and when the person knows me. So if you haven't built a relationship with me, then your sarcasm is not going to be well received by me regardless of your intentions. So I consider it to be the same for me in my classroom and with my students. So the students that I have right now that I teach in 4th grade, they've had me for 2 years. I was with them last year in 3rd, and I moved up with them to 4th grade. So I've had them in 3rd and 4th, so they know me very well, and I know them very well. Therefore, sometimes we can joke, or I can be sarcastic with them. But again, the new students that I have that I didn't have previously, and if I haven't taken that time to build a relationship with them, then sarcasm can easily go wrong. So it's best, kind of like what Dan was saying, that you know your students to know, okay, this is going to be well received or it's not. So you really have to get to know your students and know who you are working with.
Excellent. So the one thing that I hear both of you saying is that rapport is definitely at the top of the list. Without rapport, the misconception or the miscommunication definitely becomes at a higher level. So whereas Dan mentioned, and Dan, if you would tell me again, what grade level do you work with?
Yeah, I'm right now I'm middle school 6 through 8. In terms of my classroom teaching, mostly throughout my career I've been in the 8th grade, but I've basically taught all middle levels.
Gotcha. And definitely, I think when we talk about those middle grades as well as high schoolers, I think teachers in that area sometimes may tend to use sarcasm a little bit more because we enter it with the idea, you guys are older and you should know better by now. And then so sometimes you'll see it come off, but I agree with both of you. You have to know students and you have to know them well enough that they will not perceive it as you humiliating them. Definitely do not want to do that. I was looking at an article that posted, I believe just today, by Jennifer Gonzalez. And it kind of goes along the lines of one of my questions. So panelists, you probably see this question as question number 4, where she talks about not using yelling in the classroom and what yelling does. And so what are some of the things that we can do to avoid yelling? So we'll come back to that in just a minute, but I want you guys to just kind of hold that question in your mind in terms of what we can do to better rectify situations that become disruptive in our classroom. Would you say that classroom management is a form of control, modern day dictatorship? Why or why not? So you have those teachers that are kind of like, sit down, be quiet, do as I say, don't talk when I'm talking. I'm the teacher, you're the student, just listen. So would you say that that is your concept and idea of classroom management today? Tyranny, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I would think that for me, classroom management is control. In a way, it allows for me to have control of my environment, making it safe for all students and all of my learners. So at the same token, I believe there is a balance. So I wouldn't consider myself to be a dictator in my classroom, but I still have control. So there is balance. I call myself personally a no-nonsense nurturer. So I mean business in the classroom, but at the same token, my students know that I care about them because I provide opportunities for them to see me at recess, whether I'm dancing with them or, doing a brain break with them in class. So it's a clear balance that you must have.
Absolutely. Dan, how about you? Do you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, no, I agree with what Tyranny said about that it's not really so much of a dictatorship. I'd like to think that so many educators nowadays are getting out of the mindset of the chalk and talk or stand and deliver, whatever you want to call it, and really allowing the students to be much more present in not only the delivery of the material, but also maybe even some of the planning and the creativity aspect of lesson planning and delivering the information. Is it control? Yeah, it is. But again, it's control. I'd like to think that it's control in the sense that you're getting that environment to be what it's supposed to be as the adult and the professional in the room, whereas the kids are not. And whether that be a seating chart or varying the groups a lot or posted rules, whatever it is, just really making sure that you're creating that productive learning environment.
Awesome. Well, let me tell you this. For you guys being on here for the first time on our EduMatch Tweet and Talk, you are definitely not rookies at being seasoned teachers. So a couple of things that I heard here was student choice and student voice. And once you have student choice and student voice, the environment will be exactly what it needs to be, which is a learning environment where we now become simply facilitators, not necessarily dictators. And we're just watching and we're helping them to get to the learning points, and we're helping them to delve a little bit deeper into their curiosities and their wonders, because obviously the end goal for us in terms of preparing future ready students is that we want them to be critical thinkers, learners, problem solvers. And so in order to have an environment that fosters that, students have to be on task, and they have to be engaged, and they have to be passionate about what it is that they're doing. So in one word or words that come to mind, if we were to create a wordle that would be associated with classroom management, what word or words would you guys throw out there?
I would say structured, as well as safe, organized.
Good ones. Good ones. How about you, Dan?
One word is hard. I'm going to throw out 3 words if I can, and this goes back to advice that I got in my first, I don't know, month as a teacher from a coach that I had. He used to say, avoid the void. You know, like transitions and just any kind of downtime that would give the students an opportunity to just, lose sight of what the real focus was in the classroom.
Awesome. Those are great words. Avoid the void. And I know a lot of times our building admins will tell us we want bell-to-bell instruction, bell-to-bell instruction. And so if you are planning properly as an educator, you can kind of feel that, whether you're in a 45-minute segment or whether if you're in a school that is on a block schedule that goes for 90 minutes. And I've heard teachers panic, oh my God, what am I going to do with kids for 90 minutes? I don't know what I'm going to do with them. Well, I mean, if anything, I think you should be rejoicing about the fact that you have more time to engage with students to get some, project-based learning or problem-based learning activities going. So there are ways, as Dan mentioned, to avoid the void. And so our last question before we get into a little bit of scenario and role playing here is, what are some of the best classroom management tips that you can offer? Whether that's to novice pre-service teachers, first-year teachers, or even some seasoned teachers that just can't seem to get it together. What would you offer as suggestions and tips? And Dan, we could start with you this time, and then we'll pop back over to Tyranny.
So I think I threw out there just a couple little ones. Avoid the void, really get to know your students. The other thing I would say, and this goes back to an article or a blog post that I read not too long ago that really struck a chord with me, is to try and utilize the students, but try and go after those students who are the real leaders of the classroom, and that the leaders aren't necessarily the students who you might go to right away, that they're your top students, they're the brightest students, they're the leader, the real leaders. These are the kids who, think about it, you probably have 1 or 2 in every class, or you've had a few of them every year. They're the kids who, when they're absent, the entire dynamic of the classroom changes.
Yeah.
So that may mean they're like the worst behaved kids in the class, but those might be your strongest assets in terms of really building those relationships with them and having them get to be on your side to help you manage that control in the classroom.
Awesome, Dan. So Dan says find those kids that try to run the show and use them at stage front in a positive way to really get the show on the road. Awesome. Tyranny, how about you? What are your tips?
So I am a big fan of Teach Like a Champion. So I'm going to share with you just some of those strategies that I use. So for example, having clear and specific instructions, that's one tip that I would give. In my classroom every day, when I'm giving instructions, I like to start with when I say go, I include for them the movement, the verbal, and the participation in all of my instructions. So it's very clear. My students can't read my mind, so I have to be very clear on what the expectations are in my classroom. So clear and specific instructions would definitely be one tip. In addition to that, I use something called positive narration, or others call it behavior narration. So once I give clear and specific instructions, I like to point out the students who are meeting the expectation. Instead of going towards the one student who is off task and looking out the window, I'm going to point out, I see Sarah is silently walking to her seat. And I will point out the students who are meeting my expectations. And in addition to that, I like to have strong procedures and routines from day one in my classroom. That is what allows for me to have excellent classroom management, because again, my students don't they cannot read my mind, so I have to be very clear on what it means to line up. What does that look like exactly? And we practice it over and over. So with those things, in addition, proximity. I see a lot of teachers, they give instructions and then they just stand in one spot, or they sit down at their small group table. And that allows for Johnny or Sarah or whoever to be off task, that you're sitting down. No, you have to use proximity. So once you've given instructions, you walk around and you use proximity to make students, remain on task. And in addition, with all of that, just be consistent. That's my number one thing. Be consistent. Don't change things from day to day, but stay consistent. So when you have your rules and your consequences and rewards, stay consistent with them.
And also, if I could just add one more thing, I like that, stay consistent and be yourself. I think that sometimes it's hard for teachers, especially when the kids are being a little difficult, to try and be something or someone that you're not. And I don't think it has to be that way. I think sometimes that's where the sarcasm or yelling comes in, but if that's out of character for you, not only can the students pick up on that, but it's probably going to backfire on you, if anything.
Absolutely, and that's a good point that you brought up, Dan, which segues me into that article that I referenced, or that blog post that Jennifer Gonzalez published today on her cultofpedagogy.com. And so some of the things that she mentioned with the yelling is that when you do yell and you lose character, one thing that you're not doing is you're not showing the proper modeling that you would like. So we're raising these students to be citizens of a society, and if we can't even control our own anger or our thoughts through our actions, then they kind of pick up on those things. And it also tells them that when we're yelling, that's the only time that they'll pay attention to us, because our voice levels have elevated. So when we are using our normal voice, they'll take it that, oh, what we're saying is not important, and they'll kind of tune us out or drown us out. And if you're at the high school level like I am, those kids are constantly on their cell phones, and you're competing with the technology in the palm of their hands, or you're competing with the gossip that's going on. So we see all of those things develop. And so it's definitely important, as you guys mentioned, be consistent. It's okay to smile on day one. It's okay to be a nurturer, but make sure you are firm. When kids know that your expectations for them are high, the rigor in the classroom is one that doesn't allow them to have that void time, then you will find that kids will comply for you. I know in my particular classroom, kids will say it. Ooh, Miss Lewis, she don't play, but she knows she can teach her butt off. And I'll hear them say it, and they'll do what I want them to do, but I'll also hear them in the same breath say what they can do in another teacher's classroom. And I constantly remind them, don't think that those things that you get away with in other people's classroom, you can bring that up in here. And so they know that it's a culture of learning. I want what's best for them. There is no off-task behavior, and there's no, I don't know, I want to lay my head down, I want to go to sleep, because they know as soon as that head hits the desk, you're the person I'm going to call on to give me all the information. So now they realize, okay, I better just get my work done, because she is not having it. So we're going to do a quick little role playing, and Sarah, I don't know what we're looking like on our time here.
Oh, we're good. We're good.
We're good? Okay. So we've got one scenario, and I think Sarah, in this scenario, are you going to play the student?
No, I think that Dan wants to play the student in this one.
Okay, so Dan is going to be the student in this scenario. Dan, do you need me to refresh your memory on what that is, or you got it?
I'm pretty sure I just need to be distracting, all right?
Okay, that's it. That's it. And so for this scenario, you guys tuning in, watching us, I am going to play the teacher, trying to get through a lesson, and Dan is going to be my student. I want you guys to observe and tell us what you see that's right, what you see that's wrong, what would you do? And Tyranny will kind of be the voice of the people, and if Sarah wants to pipe in on as well, that she can. All right, so boys and girls, thank you so much. Oh, I am so excited about this lesson. How many of you guys are excited? No one's excited? Oh, well, I see a few of you guys. Oh, Miss, Dan. Yes, Dan.
Miss, did you see that game last night?
I'm not exactly sure what game you're referencing, Dan, but however, I'm excited about this lesson. We're talking about plants, and you know, in my backyard, I have several plants. I'm not a green thumb, Dan, but have you ever planted any plants?
Planting's boring.
Plants are boring. Plants are the source of oxygen and energy and life. How could you say plants are boring? Have you ever swung from a tree before?
No, but I swing a baseball bat, so I guess I like the grass that grows on the field.
Oh, Dan. And I'm going to pause there. So, ladies and gentlemen, in this scenario, what did you notice? What might have gone right and what might have gone wrong, and maybe what would you have done?
So are you wanting me to share now?
Oh, yes. Sorry, Tyranny.
I didn't know if you were trying to get, responses from some people on Twitter who were watching or anything. So I just want to say that I noticed that the teacher sort of engaged with the student when they were trying to get off task and talk about the baseball game and things like that. So in that situation, when you have a student who's trying to do that, making sure that you aren't engaging with them as far as continuing to encourage them to stay off task. You want to redirect and get back on task and focus. So that's one thing that I saw.
Yep. And how could that have gone wrong? And Dan, if you want to pipe in as well, or Sarah, if you see questions in the feed or people that are chiming in, how could that have gone wrong?
So I think that I might have given you a little bit of a gift. You're welcome. No, just kidding. But when I said like the part about baseball, I think for a teacher it'd be easy to be like, "Are you kidding me right now? You're talking about baseball. You're asking me about the game. We want to talk about plants." But I think what you got at or started to get at was to try and make that relevant still to that student who seems not interested in plants, but at least mention like, okay, they play a sport outside, maybe I can bring that content in and meet somewhere in the middle, compromise on here's the content, here's your interest, and here's how they collide and meet in the middle.
That is a good point, Dan, because I know a lot of times my son played baseball, and if it wasn't for that soft turf out there to cushion the fall, despite the grass stains that get in the pants, but you are right, finding a way to make that connection so that the students still kind of get something out of it, but the rest of the class is still engaging on topic. Very good. And our last scenario for the night that we will do, and Sarah, are you jumping in on this one?
All right, I'm ready. Getting the acting chops ready.
So, Sarah, are you going to do the role of the student in this one?
Sure. Student is fine. I'm just going to review what it is. All right, cool. I will be the student.
All right, so Sarah's going to be the student, and then once again, I will be the teacher. All right, you guys, we are getting ready to go over Dante's Inferno. So we want to do a quick review before we get into...
Jump in.
Excuse me. Sarah? Sarah.
Yeah.
Unless you are listening to Dante's Inferno in those headphones, I suggest that you take them off your head and get involved.
Excuse me.
Or you may end up in the level of hell.
I'm not dealing with this. I'm about to call my mom.
Yes, you will deal with this. The fact that you walked into this classroom means that you are going to be involved. Well, you know what? You know what, Sarah?
I'm calling my mom right now.
Matter of fact, call your mom and tell her to pick you up. I am removing you from this classroom because you will not disrupt this learning environment.
All right, bye.
We will see you later. In fact, I've got a detention and a referral on the way for you.
Man, all right, whatever, Miss Lewis. Mm-hmm.
So now, Dan and Tierraney, tell me what you observed. If anything went right, what was it? What did you see that went wrong, and how should we have turned that thing around?
I gotta be honest. Unfortunately, that looks a lot way too familiar. It was like haunting. Anyway, I think obviously the situation escalated very quickly. I think maybe step one could have been, I'm assuming there's a policy somewhere that says you can't be on a cell phone, you can't use a cell phone from class. Or I think maybe just going back over like, hey, this is not acceptable classroom behavior, but I think obviously not getting to that level of frustration where the yelling and the real confrontation with the teacher and the student set in.
Absolutely. And Tyranny, what do you think?
So I guess if I would have saw a situation happening like this on my campus, I would guess that the teacher never set up her expectations in the beginning of the year with her students, because if she did that, then they would know, okay, cell phones aren't allowed or this isn't allowed. They would know the expectation. So, I mean, even if they do know the expectation, sometimes students still choose to make decisions that aren't meeting the expectation. So with that said, a consequence should then be issued, but at the same token, just in the other scenario, if that is happening in your classroom, you want to make sure that you're not yelling, and also that you're not engaging with that student. You could ask them to step outside for a moment and then calmly speak with them, or tap on their desk, tell them put their cell phone away. It doesn't have to be a big situation. I like to keep small problems a small problem. So you just have to look at it from that perspective.
Absolutely. So case in point is teachers. We have to kind of learn to, one, choose our battles. The immediate thought that comes to mind, we have to almost reflect on what that is, and if possible, go ahead and change that viewpoint. So that way it doesn't go from 0 to 60 real fast, as Dan mentioned. It doesn't become a situation that's escalated, because what I could almost imagine, especially at the middle school and high school level, and even now at the elementary level, the rest of the class is probably chiming in and ooh, and then you've not just lost the one student, but the whole class at the same time. So classroom management, ladies and gentlemen, as we discussed here today, is definitely key. You cannot get to learning. You cannot get to the goals and those aligning those standards and those benchmarks and things that are expected of us if we cannot get the class together. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we need to run a dictatorship, but we do need to set clear expectations. We need to establish a rapport with our students. We need to make sure that our students feel comfortable in knowing that we are trying to be nurturing. We are caring about what it is that they're engaged in, giving them voice, giving them choice, so that way they feel like they have an active role and they're not just showing up to our dog and pony show each and every day, but that they are also part of this as well. So thank you so much, Dan and Tyranny, for joining us today on Classroom Management. You guys rock, and I hope that you will become regular panelists on our EduMatch Tweet and Talk, and I am going to shoot it back over to Sarah.
All right, wanted to thank you all so much. Like that was amazing. Just such great food for thought. Thank you to everyone on panel, to Tyranny, to Dan. Thank you to our awesome moderator Valerie. Thank you to everybody in Q&A. I'm sorry, I looked up and I saw that it was full. So we do appreciate your questions, and sorry we didn't get to them this week. Next week I'll be more mindful of the questions coming through in the Q&A. But fantastic conversation on Twitter as well. So definitely just wanted to remind you all that the transcript of the chat will be available in just a couple of minutes, thanks to Participate Learning. So that is a great platform to participate in Twitter chats. And this episode will be available as an iTunes podcast in the coming weeks. So definitely check that out. Come back next week. We're going to have Valerie return to moderate an Educational Disturbance Part 2. So if you remember, in Part 1, we had some great conversation about things going on in different areas of the country. Next week, we are going to be talking about more educational disturbances, so check that out. Anyone can be a panelist, so just leave a comment on the Google Hangout page. For next week, it is bit.ly/tweettalk42, so tweettalk42. And if you want to subscribe to our podcast, just check out bit.ly/edumatchpodcast. So again, everyone have a fantastic night, and we will check you out next week.
Bye. Bye.